The gavel cracked against the wood, sharp as a gunshot, echoing through the Jefferson County courtroom in downtown Louisville. My hands trembled on the worn oak table as I forced myself to sit still. I had promised I wouldn't cry again. Not here, not in front of him. Ethan sat across from me, in a crisp charcoal suit I knew he'd never bought with his own money. His smirk was casual, almost lazy, as if this whole proceeding were nothing more than a game. And when the clerk read out the motion, I caught the glint in his eyes. He looked straight at me, leaned back in his chair, and mouthed the words, asterisk still crying, Mom. Asterisk. That was the moment the air left my lungs. My only child. My boy I'd once rocked to sleep on summer nights when cicadas hummed outside our shotgun house. Now mocking my tears in a courtroom packed with strangers. If you're watching this, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I had been humiliated before by my son's words, cut down in kitchens, ignored in grocery store parking lots, dismissed at family reunions, but this was different. Court was public. Court had consequences. Court had witnesses who scribbled notes while I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. And that's when it hit me. Maybe this wasn't about my tears anymore. Maybe this was about his. The judge shuffled papers, asking for documents. I opened my leather folder, the same one I'd carried since my working days at the public library, and laid out a series of leases, receipts, and certified letters. They weren't just papers. They were my spine. My defense. My voice. Ethan didn't notice the weight of what I had in front of me. He laughed under his breath, the same way he used to laugh when he thought I didn't know about his teenage lies. To him, I was still the weak one. The burden. The woman who cried too easily. But he hadn't read the last line of that lease. He hadn't realized the clause that would turn every smug grin into the sob of a man who finally faced the mirror of his own actions. By the time the bailiff called for a short recess, I no longer felt the tremor in my hands. The tears had dried. I wasn't here to beg for his love or defend myself as a mother. I was here to enforce a truth written in black ink long before he decided to mock me. And in that courthouse, for the first time in decades, I didn't fear his judgment. I waited calmly for his. If that sounds harsh, here's how we got there. The hum of the courthouse air conditioning reminded me of the old library I used to work in. Steady, mechanical, almost like white noise meant to quiet the mind. But nothing about my mind was quiet that morning. My palms were still damp from clutching the folder, but what lingered more than nerves was the ache of years. The ache of always being the one to swallow my pride, patch the cracks, and hold the family together, even when the family didn't want me. See, my misbelief was simple. I thought keeping the peace at any cost was better than making waves. That was the line I'd fed myself for decades. Don't argue. Don't push. Don't risk losing him. He's all you've got. But there's a problem with swallowing your voice. You start to choke on it. I still remember the first time Ethan dismissed my tears. It wasn't in a courtroom. It was at the Kroger off Bardstown Road, under those buzzing fluorescent lights that make everything look harsher than it really is. He was maybe 16, lanky and restless, and we'd gotten into a spat about his grades. I'd asked him to at least show some effort. His teachers were calling, worried. I must have looked too emotional because he muttered, asterisk God, Mom, you're embarrassing. Stop crying. Asterisk. Embarrassing. That word cut me deeper than the failing grades. From then on, I kept tissues tucked into my purse like contraband. Not to use them freely, but to hide the evidence. To dab my cheeks before he noticed. To keep the peace. But peace built on silence? It doesn't last. I can still smell the coffee from the Speedway gas station near our neighborhood, the one I'd stop at every morning after he left for school. I'd order a medium hazelnut, sit in my old Toyota Corolla, and stare out at Dixie Highway traffic. It was the one place no one could see me cry. That's how I measured my mornings, not in commutes, not in errands, but in whether the tears had time to fall before I clocked in at the library. And yet, I told myself it was normal. That moms carried burdens heavier than they let on. That maybe this was love, quiet, self-sacrificing, unspoken love. But the truth? Love without boundaries isn't love. It's servitude. That belief clung to me like humidity on a Kentucky July evening. I carried it through birthdays where Ethan barely showed up, through holidays when his excuses grew flimsier, through countless dinners at Cracker Barrel where I paid the bill while he scrolled his phone. Every time, I thought, asterisk at least is here. At least I'm not alone. Asterisk. Until the day came when I realized I was lonelier sitting across from my own son than I was sitting by myself. And still, I held my tongue. Until the property came into play. Until the papers with his name and mine landed in a county clerk's office. That's when silence stopped being safe. It became dangerous. Because silence meant losing the only stability I had left. So yes, I cried in that courtroom. I cried because decades of quiet had finally dragged me into a place where tears could no longer be hidden behind a tissue in a grocery aisle or wiped away in a gas station parking lot. But what Ethan never understood was this. My tears were not weakness. They were the overflow of strength too long restrained. And if he thought mocking them would keep me in my place, he was wrong. Because my tears had led me here. To the courthouse. To the records. To the moment I finally learned that peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of justice. But the truth didn't start that night. It started months earlier. The story didn't begin in the courthouse. It began months earlier, in the modest shotgun house I'd lived in for nearly 30 years, tucked into a quiet block of Louisville's Germantown neighborhood. My late husband and I had bought it for $58,000 back in the early 90s, a number that sounded impossible now when Zillow showed similar homes going for 10 times that. That house wasn't just walls and wood. It was the backdrop of Ethan's first steps, his high school prom photos on the porch, the clatter of homework at the kitchen table while cicadas buzzed outside. When my husband passed from a sudden heart attack 15 years ago, the house became even more sacred. It was the last thing we'd built together. But grief has a strange way of twisting priorities. For years, I thought holding on to Ethan was more important than holding on to the house. Which is why, when he asked to move back in for just a little while after his divorce, I said yes. He arrived with boxes full of half-broken furniture, a 55-inch flat screen, and debts he refused to name. At first, I didn't mind. The sound of someone else in the house, his heavy boots stomping up the stairs, the hum of his late-night video games, made the place feel alive again. But a little while stretched into a year. Then 2. And slowly, his tone shifted. My house became asterisk his asterisk house. He began talking about renovating the upstairs, making comments about how when I take this place over he'd finally fix the siding. I brushed it off, until the day I found a manila envelope on the kitchen counter addressed to me. It was from a loan company, one I didn't recognize. Inside was an application Ethan had started, listing the Germantown house as collateral. My stomach dropped. I confronted him that night over a plate of reheated fried chicken from Kroger. Ethan, what is this? You can't just use the house like it's yours to gamble with. He barely looked up from his plate. Relax, Mom. I'm just planning ahead. Everyone knows this place is gonna be mine anyway. The words hit like a slap. Planning ahead. As if my life were just a timer running down until he could collect the prize. That's when I started digging. At the county clerk's office downtown, I requested copies of the deed and the original lease agreement Ethan had signed when he first moved back in. The clerk, a kind woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, slid the papers across the counter and said, "You might want to hold on to these." And she was right. That lease, just a simple, typed document we'd signed in 2021 to make things clear about rent and utilities, became my lifeline. Buried in the text was a clause Ethan had either forgotten or never bothered to read. It gave me rights he assumed I didn't have. Still, I didn't want to fight. Not yet. I hoped he'd come around, that maybe I was overreacting. So I turned to my cousin Denise, a sharp-witted nurse who lived over in St. Matthews. Over sweet tea at a Waffle House near the I-64 exit, I spilled the story. Denise shook her head, tapping her nails against the table. "Corinne, you can't just let him walk over you. You've got the paperwork. You've got the proof. But you need a plan." Her words stuck with me. Meanwhile, Ethan only grew bolder. He stopped paying the agreed-upon utilities, claiming he was short this month. He started inviting friends over late at night, turning the living room into a makeshift poker den. Once, I came downstairs at 2 a.m. to find cigar smoke curling into the ceiling and a pile of crumpled bills on my coffee table. That night, I sat in my car in the driveway, tears pooling in my lap. The Corolla's dashboard clock glowed 2:17 a.m., and I whispered to myself, asterisk if I don't set boundaries now, I'll lose everything, him, the house, my peace. Asterisk. So I began keeping a ledger. Dates, amounts, missed payments. I stapled receipts, printed emails, logged every violation of that lease. It wasn't spite, it was survival. Looking back, I realized that was the turning point. The day I stopped being just a mother trying to keep the peace, and started becoming a woman ready to defend what was hers. Which brings us to the plan I should have made sooner. The plan didn't come to me in one lightning strike. It came piece by piece, like a puzzle I'd been too tired to finish. It started with the lease. That plain, 2-page document we'd both signed at my kitchen table back in March 2021, when Ethan first moved in after his divorce. He'd rolled his eyes at me back then, acting like it was silly paperwork, but I'd insisted. If you're going to live here, we need rules, I'd said. He smirked, signed his name in rushed loops, and never thought about it again. But I had. And buried in the middle of that lease was a clause. Asterisk failure to pay agreed-upon utilities for 3 consecutive months shall result in forfeiture of tenant rights and immediate right of landlord to pursue eviction. Asterisk. At the time, it felt harsh. I never thought I'd use it against my own son. But by 2023, he had missed 6 months of utilities in a row, despite holding a job at a car dealership across the river in Indiana. That clause was no longer theoretical, it was my anchor. So I sat at my dining table one quiet Sunday afternoon, a legal pad beside me, and wrote out what I needed to do. Document every violation of the lease. Send Ethan a certified notice of non-compliance. If ignored, file in small claims court. Protect myself by securing the deed and records with the county clerk. It wasn't about punishing him. It was about drawing a line in ink instead of tears. The timer became Thanksgiving. Denise reminded me of it over another Waffle House breakfast. If you don't act before the holidays, he'll drag this out into the new year. Courts slow down, bills pile up, and you'll be stuck paying everything again. She was right. By late November, LG&E had sent 2 shut-off warnings. My heating bill for October alone had spiked to $187, and Ethan hadn't contributed a dime. Meanwhile, he was still ordering DoorDash like money grew on trees. The stakes weren't just emotional anymore. They were financial. If I didn't enforce the lease, I risked losing not just the house but also my retirement savings. So, I mailed the notice. Certified. Return receipt requested. It cost me $4.05 at the post office on Goss Avenue, and I kept the little green receipt stapled to my folder. The woman at the counter gave me a knowing smile, like she'd seen plenty of mothers in my position before. I also visited the Jefferson County Clerk's office again, this time asking for certified copies of the deed. The clerk, a younger man this time, told me, keep these safe. They're your shield. I walked out clutching that envelope like it was armor. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed something had shifted. He came into the kitchen one evening, arms crossed, and said, "What's with all these papers you're hoarding? You trying to kick me out, Mom?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I slid the folder shut and said quietly, "I'm just protecting myself." His laugh was sharp, almost cruel. Protecting yourself from your own son asterisk? That's pathetic. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. The countdown to Thanksgiving loomed. If Ethan didn't respond to the notice within 30 days, I'd file the eviction claim in small claims court. It was all there, spelled out in the Kentucky statutes I'd printed from the library computer. For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. A mix of fear and resolve. Fear of losing him. Resolve to not lose myself. Because what he didn't know was this: every cruel laugh, every ignored bill, every mocking word had already written the story. All I was doing now was filing it in the proper office. Then the pushback started. The pushback came faster than I expected. 2 weeks after I sent the certified notice, I heard Ethan slam the mailbox shut and stomp up the steps. He barged into the living room where I was knitting on the couch, the green return receipt card crushed in his fist. "You've lost your damn mind, Mom," he snapped. "Certified mail? To your own son." I set the yarn aside, my heart thudding but my voice steady. "It's business, Ethan. That's all." He laughed, a hollow sound. "Business? You think some stupid little lease is going to hold up in court? You're insane if you think a judge is going to side with you." That night, I found out he'd already called a lawyer. A neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, spotted Ethan in the parking lot of a strip mall off Dixie Highway, walking into a law office above a payday loan store. When she told me the next day, my stomach knotted. He wasn't just bluffing. He was preparing for war. The first complication came with a letter slid under my door, a response from his attorney. The language was formal, sharp. Any attempt at eviction would be met with a counterclaim for undue hardship and unlawful tenancy removal. In plainer words, Ethan was planning to sue me back. I sat at my kitchen table, that letter trembling in my hands, wondering if I'd pushed too far. I was a retired librarian on a fixed pension. He had legal representation. How was I supposed to fight that? Denise came over that weekend, a casserole in tow, and listened as I read the letter aloud. She shook her head. "It's intimidation. That's all. Don't let him scare you off. You've got the lease. You've got receipts. Just keep your records airtight." I tried to believe her, but the second complication hit even harder. At the first hearing, the judge glanced at my paperwork and frowned. "Mrs. Adler, these copies aren't notarized. Do you have originals?" My chest tightened. The originals were safe in my folder, yes, but 2 utility receipts had faded so badly the ink was almost gone. The judge asked me to supplement with clearer documentation at the next appearance. For a moment, I thought the entire case might collapse before it even began. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt small again, like the woman who hid her tears in gas station parking lots. Ethan, on the other hand, strutted down the steps, grinning as if he'd already won. But I wasn't done. Not yet. That night, I sat under the glow of the kitchen light, sorting through my papers. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before, a line at the bottom of an email Ethan had sent me months earlier. He'd written it casually, demanding I cover another utility bill, but the email signature automatically listed his work address at the dealership. Buried in the metadata, it also showed the timestamp proving he was paid on those exact days he'd claimed he was broke. It wasn't the final reveal, not yet, but it was enough to remind me the truth was on my side. And still, doubt lingered. Was I looking at the wrong problem? Was this fight about money, or about finally refusing to be mocked by the son I'd sacrificed everything for? That's when I realized I'd been looking at the wrong problem. When the judge questioned my paperwork, I felt that old, familiar shame rise in my chest, the same shame I'd carried for years when Ethan called me embarrassing for crying. I almost folded. Almost. But sitting in my Corolla in the courthouse parking lot, I stared at the steering wheel and asked myself a hard question. What am I really fighting for? It wasn't just the utilities. It wasn't even just the house. It was the pattern, the way Ethan had turned my tears into a punchline, the way I'd let silence become my cage. This fight wasn't about rent. It was about respect. So I reframed my goal. Up until then, my plan had been defensive. Protect the house, gather receipts, hold the line. But defense alone wasn't enough. I needed to go on record. I needed to say out loud what I had swallowed for years. Denise saw it before I did. One Sunday afternoon at her kitchen table, over bowls of chili, she said, "Corinne, you keep trying to fight this in the shadows. You need to stand up in daylight. You've got to make it official." Her words hit home. So I made a decision. No more begging, no more hiding behind tissues and file folders. I would speak, on the record, in front of my son, the judge, and anyone else listening. The opportunity came at the next hearing. Ethan's lawyer opened with a smug tone, claiming my case was weak and that my pursuit of eviction was vindictive. I could see Ethan smirking at the table, his knee bouncing with that restless arrogance he'd had since he was a teenager. When the judge turned to me, my mouth went dry. For a second, I thought my voice would fail me. But then I remembered the countless mornings I'd cried in that Kroger parking lot, whispering into coffee cups, "One day, you'll have to stand up for yourself." So I stood. "Your Honor," I said, my voice trembling at first but then firming, "this isn't about punishing my son. It's about enforcing an agreement we both signed. I've covered months of utilities alone, even though our lease required shared responsibility. I have the receipts, the certified notices, and the deed. This house is not his property to gamble with. I won't be mocked into silence anymore." The courtroom was quiet enough to hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Ethan's smirk faltered. His lawyer shuffled papers, stalling. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. That was my midpoint shift, the moment I stopped apologizing for having boundaries and started declaring them. And it wasn't just words. I backed them with action. I hired a legal aid attorney through the Kentucky Legal Aid office downtown. They couldn't take the whole case, but they guided me on filing procedures, notarizing my documents, and preparing exhibits. For a $50 filing fee, I got my papers stamped and official, something Ethan hadn't expected. I also requested Ethan's payment history from LG&E using the account number, something I'd never thought I could do. When the clerk handed me the printout, I felt the weight of proof in my hands. Line after line showed months of unpaid balances, all under Ethan's name. Now I wasn't just reacting to Ethan's behavior. I was following the rules, every single one. Thanksgiving came and went. While families across Louisville carved turkeys and watched football, I sat at my dining table, binder open, marking deadlines and preparing filings. Ethan spent most of the holiday at his girlfriend's place, ignoring me. That was fine. I had work to do. And when he finally confronted me, storming into the kitchen one night and yelling, "Why are you dragging me through this? I'm your son, not some tenant." I looked him in the eye and said, "You're both. And right now, you're in breach of contract." The words stunned him. I knew then that the tide was turning. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a landlord, a plaintiff, and a woman finally willing to speak without shame. So I stopped asking for permission and started following the rules, every single one. Once I made the shift, everything became about the steps. Clear, deliberate, documented steps. The first was tightening my paperwork. I went back to the Jefferson County Clerk's office, stood in line for nearly an hour behind people paying property taxes, and got every copy of the deed and lease agreement notarized. Cost me $12. It wasn't glamorous, but it meant no judge could dismiss me for uncertified copies again. Next, I organized my binder like I used to organize circulation records at the library, tabs, dates, receipts in chronological order. I even color-coded utility bills, blue for water, yellow for gas, pink for electric. If the judge wanted proof, I could flip to it in seconds. Then came the certified filings. On a Tuesday morning, I took my neatly stacked forms to the small claims counter at the courthouse. The clerk stamped them with a loud thunk that echoed like a drumbeat in my chest. Filing fee, $50. Court date, 3 weeks away. I also mailed Ethan a copy of the court summons by certified mail. Another $4.05, another little green receipt stapled into my folder. Every step left a paper trail. Every paper trail was protection. Meanwhile, Ethan kept pushing. He texted me late at night, "You're ruining this family. Do you really want strangers deciding our business?" I didn't answer. Instead, I screenshot each message, printed them at the library, and filed them under communications. At the advice of the legal aid attorney, I also pulled Ethan's LG&E payment history directly. That required a visit to their office on 9th Street. The clerk behind the glass looked surprised when I requested the records, but when I slid over the account number, she printed 20 pages without a word. Line after line showed balances unpaid, dates matching the very months Ethan swore he had nothing to give. The evidence piled higher. By the time the next hearing rolled around, I felt almost calm. Almost. I walked into the courtroom with my binder pressed to my chest like armor. Denise came with me, squeezing my arm as we sat down. Across the aisle, Ethan swaggered in late, tie loose, smirk plastered on his face. His lawyer shuffled papers, probably expecting me to fold under pressure again. But when the judge asked for my exhibits, I stood tall and handed over the binder. Everything is documented, Your Honor. Lease violations, utility records, certified notices, and communication logs. My voice didn't shake this time. For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. The judge nodded, the clerk stamped my exhibits, and Ethan's smirk flickered. My heart lifted, relief like cool air after a Kentucky thunderstorm. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. For a few sweet minutes, I thought I'd won. The judge leafed through my binder, nodding at the tabs, pointing out the certified mail receipts, the notarized lease. He even complimented the organization. Mrs. Adler, this is thorough. Very thorough. I sat taller in my chair. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, drumming his fingers against the table. For once, I wasn't the one trembling. Then came the backfire. Ethan's lawyer cleared his throat and pulled out a sheaf of papers with a flourish. Your Honor, while my client acknowledges the lease, we contend that the landlord, his mother, acted in bad faith by allowing this alleged debt to accrue. Further, we submit that she benefited from my client's financial contributions to the household, including groceries and maintenance labor, which offset any unpaid utilities. Groceries? Maintenance? I nearly laughed. Ethan hadn't cooked a meal in that house since he was 12. And maintenance labor meant occasionally tightening a squeaky hinge after I begged him. But the judge didn't laugh. He rubbed his chin and said, I'll allow this into the record. My stomach sank. Ethan leaned back in his chair, that awful smirk returning. He mouthed the words, told you so. The lawyer kept going. Additionally, we are filing a counterclaim for undue hardship. Forcing my client out of his long-time residence, particularly given his limited financial means, would cause significant distress. We believe eviction under these circumstances constitutes an abuse of landlord authority. It was like the air had been knocked out of me. Abuse? Distress? Those words made me sound like a villain in my own story. The judge glanced at me. Mrs. Adler, do you have evidence to counter these claims? I swallowed hard. Yes, I had receipts. Yes, I had emails. But did I have proof that Ethan hadn't provided groceries? Proof that his maintenance was a fantasy? No. My binder suddenly felt thin, like paper shields against arrows. By the time the hearing ended, the judge hadn't ruled. He wanted supplemental evidence from both sides. We'll reconvene in 30 days, he said. His gavel tapped once, sealing my fate in limbo. I walked out of the courthouse with Denise, my legs shaking. The December wind cut sharp against my cheeks, and tears blurred my vision. He turned it all on me, I whispered. Now I'm the bad guy. Denise rubbed my arm. Don't let him get in your head. He's bluffing. You've got truth on your side. But in that moment, I didn't feel powerful. I felt exposed, humiliated. Just like in the grocery store years ago when Ethan told me to stop crying. Only now it wasn't a store clerk watching, it was a courtroom full of strangers. 4 days, I spiraled. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my binder, replaying the lawyer's words. Abuse. Distress. Bad faith. They rang louder than any encouragement. Ethan seemed to revel in my silence. He strutted through the house, louder than ever, slamming cabinets, inviting friends over, acting as if he'd already won. And I almost gave up. Almost. Until one evening, digging through a stack of old paperwork, I stumbled across something I hadn't noticed before, an earlier version of the lease. The draft Ethan had annotated on his laptop before printing. He'd emailed it to me months earlier, suggesting changes I'd refused. And in that email, one line stuck out, something he'd written himself that contradicted his lawyer's claims. Until one line in an old message changed everything. The email was buried in a dusty old folder on my laptop, labeled House Docs 2021. I hadn't opened it in months. But there it was, an attachment Ethan had sent me before we signed the final lease. At first glance, it looked like nothing, a Word document, full of strike-throughs and highlighted text. Ethan had been tinkering with the agreement, suggesting edits like mom pays for lawn care and utilities optional. I'd rejected most of his edits, insisting we stick with the original draft. We signed the unaltered version, and that was that. Or so I thought. But as I scrolled through the email itself, a sentence caught my eye. Ethan had written, "I'll cover utilities if you let me move in early, since you're worried about bills." My breath caught. There it was. His own words, in writing, promising exactly what he now claimed he never agreed to. I printed it out on the old library printer downtown, 10 cents a page, the ink slightly smudged but legible. As I held that sheet in my hands, I felt something stir inside me. Not just relief, but vindication. For once, I wasn't the one begging for credibility. Ethan had given it to me, unknowingly, in black and white. I stapled the email to my binder under a new tab, counterclaim evidence. When I showed Denise, she whistled low. "You've got him. That's the nail in his coffin, Corinne." Still, I was cautious. Judges don't like theatrics, they like facts. So I kept building. I dug through grocery receipts stuffed in old showboxes under my bed. Turns out, I had years' worth. From Kroger, Walmart, even the Save-A-Lot on Preston Highway. 90% of them were signed with my debit card. Ethan's contribution? One Kroger receipt for beer and chips. That was it. Then I called LG&E and requested certified copies of the account statements, not just the printouts. It cost me another $15, but when the clerk stamped them with a raised seal, I knew I was bulletproof. By the time the second hearing rolled around in January, my binder was heavier than a Bible. Inside the courtroom, Ethan swaggered in like always. He wore the same charcoal suit, but this time the collar looked wrinkled, like it had been pulled from a pile on the floor. His lawyer shuffled papers, clearly expecting me to fold again. But when the judge asked for supplemental evidence, I slid the email across the table. "Your Honor, this is an email sent by my son, Ethan Adler, dated February 28, 2021. In it, he explicitly agrees to pay utilities as a condition of moving in. This is his wording, not mine." The judge adjusted his glasses, reading slowly. He looked up at Ethan. "Mr. Adler, is this your email address? Did you send this?" Ethan's face drained of color. Yeah, but that was just, like, it wasn't final." "Answer the question directly," the judge interrupted. "Yes," Ethan muttered. The smirk was gone. I felt adrenaline rush through me, but I kept my voice steady. "Additionally, Your Honor, here are certified copies of the LG&E records showing unpaid balances for 6 consecutive months. And here are grocery receipts from the same period, nearly all of which I paid in full." The judge flipped through the stack. He didn't look impressed with Ethan's lawyer's arguments anymore. That's when it hit me. Ethan hadn't just underestimated me. He'd left a trail of his own arrogance behind, emails, promises, patterns. All I had done was gather it, like a librarian shelving overdue books. The courtroom felt different now. The power had shifted. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one on trial. Ethan was. Now I knew exactly where to stand. The morning of the final hearing, I woke before dawn. Louisville was cold and gray, a thin layer of frost glistening on the sidewalks as I scraped my Corolla's windshield. I dressed in my best navy blazer, the one I'd worn to Ethan's high school graduation, and tucked my binder under my arm like it was a shield. Inside the courthouse, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee from the lobby vending machine. Denise was there, loyal as ever, clutching her thermos and whispering, "You've got this, Corinne." I wasn't so sure, but I knew I was ready. The judge opened with the facts. We are here to resolve Adler versus Adler regarding alleged lease violations, utility debts, and a counterclaim of undue hardship. His voice echoed through the wood-paneled courtroom. Ethan's lawyer started, launching into a polished speech about how family matters should not be litigated and how my client has contributed significantly, even if not in cash. Ethan nodded along, arms folded, eyes flicking toward me like daggers. When it was my turn, I rose to my feet. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. Your Honor, I said, this case is not about family drama. It's about a contract. My son and I signed a lease in 2021. He agreed to pay half the utilities. He didn't. I covered those costs. I filed notices properly, gave him time to respond, and now I'm here to enforce what was written. I slid the email across again, the one where Ethan promised to pay utilities. This is his own admission, in writing. This isn't my word against his. This is his word against himself. The judge examined it, then looked squarely at Ethan. Mr. Adler, do you dispute this email? Ethan stammered. It wasn't final. Final or not, you sent it, the judge said firmly. I pressed forward. Here are certified LG&E records showing 6 consecutive months unpaid. Here are receipts for groceries and maintenance expenses, nearly all in my name. And here, I said, pulling out the certified notice, is proof that I gave him every opportunity to make it right before filing in court. The judge leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the bench. He turned to Ethan's lawyer. Counsel, do you have anything to refute this documentation? The lawyer shuffled papers, clearly flustered. Your Honor, we maintain that eviction would cause undue hardship. The judge cut him off. Undue hardship does not erase contractual obligations, nor does it excuse 6 months of unpaid utilities. Ethan's face reddened, his jaw tightening. The ruling came swiftly. Ethan was found in breach of the lease. He was ordered to pay back utility costs totaling $1,122 plus filing fees, and he had 30 days to vacate the property. My request for eviction was granted. The gavel came down, final and sharp. I sat down slowly, letting the weight of it sink in. For months, I had been bracing for humiliation, for the sting of being dismissed. But instead, the law had spoken, not in whispers, not in pity, but in plain, undeniable terms. Ethan's chair scraped against the floor as he bolted up, muttering, "Unbelievable. My own mother." He stormed out, his lawyer chasing after him. I stayed seated, tears pricking my eyes. Not the weak kind of tears Ethan mocked, but the kind that came when a heavy burden finally lifts. Denise squeezed my hand. You did it. You really did it. Walking out of the courthouse that day, the winter air didn't feel as cold. Downtown traffic roared, horns honking, buses hissing at stops, but inside me, everything was quiet. Peaceful. And here's the thing, it wasn't about punishing Ethan. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about accountability. About proving that boundaries, once drawn, mean something, even in a family. I had stood up in daylight, with nothing but paper and truth, and for once, my son's mocking laughter couldn't touch me. Then came the calls. The calls started before I even got home. First, it was Ethan's lawyer, leaving a stiff voicemail. Mrs. Adler, my client requests an extension on the 30-day deadline. Please contact our office. I didn't return it. The judge's ruling was clear. Extensions weren't mine to give. Then came Ethan himself. 3 missed calls, 1 text, "You ruined me. Hope you're happy." Happy? No. Relieved? Yes. The next day, the ripple spread through the family. My sister in Bowling Green called, her voice tight. "Corinne, what's this I'm hearing about you evicting Ethan?" News travels fast in Kentucky, especially when Denise's blunt storytelling is involved. I told her the truth. I didn't evict my son. The court did, because he broke the lease. She sighed, torn between sympathy and judgment. But by the end of the call, she admitted, "You did what you had to do." Meanwhile, neighbors who had watched Ethan's late-night poker games and loud music nodded at me in quiet solidarity. Mrs. Delgado from across the street left a plate of tamales on my porch with a note, "Good for you." About time. Financially, the judgment helped. Within 2 weeks, Ethan sent a partial payment, likely pressured by his lawyer. It wasn't the full $1,122, but it was enough to cover my January bills without dipping into savings. For once, the weight wasn't solely on my shoulders. The house grew quieter. No boots stomping up the stairs, no blaring TV at 2 a.m. The silence was bittersweet. I grieved the son I used to know, the boy who once begged me to read Where the Wild Things Are for the 100th time. But I didn't grieve the man who mocked my tears and tried to steal my home. Still, just when I thought it was settled, I thought it was over. The ruling was final, the house was mine again, and Ethan had 30 days to leave. But life has a way of testing whether you've truly learned your lesson. 2 weeks after the judgment, I was in the Kroger produce aisle, picking through apples, when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Adler," a woman's voice said. "This is Rachel. I'm Ethan's girlfriend." I froze between bins of Gala and Honeycrisp. "Yes." Her voice was timid. "I just thought you should know. Ethan's been telling everyone you kicked him out without warning. He's saying you turned your back on him, that you embarrassed him in court. Some of his friends are calling you heartless." My grip tightened on the apple in my hand. For a moment, the old reflex came back, the urge to defend myself, to soften the story, to apologize for setting a boundary. But then I took a deep breath and said, "Rachel, I didn't evict Ethan without warning. I gave him notices, chances, time. The court ruled because he broke the lease." Silence. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "I believe you. Honestly, I've seen how he talks to you. I couldn't listen to his version anymore without calling." That was the twist I didn't expect. For years, Ethan had controlled the narrative, painting me as over-emotional, weak, a burden. Now someone from his own circle had seen through it. But the second twist came the following week, when I went back to the clerk's office to file proof of partial payment. The same older clerk who had first handed me the deed leaned in and said, "Mrs. Adler, I shouldn't say this, but one of our junior staff flagged your case. They thought it was a good example of how a lease clause can hold up even in family disputes. Your file's been used in training." I blinked at her. My messy, painful story was now a case study. Walking out of that office, I felt something I hadn't in years, pride. Not pride in taking Ethan down. Pride in surviving with dignity intact. And here's the thing, Rachel's call and the clerk's comment forced me to see the real twist. This wasn't about Ethan anymore. It was about me. About how I'd spent decades believing silence kept the peace, when in truth, silence only delayed the storm. What I learned wasn't about them. It was about me. For most of my life, I thought love meant sacrifice without limits. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I kept the peace, if I patched over every crack, then maybe my son would love me back the way I loved him. That was my misbelief. But this fight, these hearings, the paperwork, the humiliation, and the victory, taught me the truth. Boundaries are not betrayals. They are proof of self-respect. I had believed that my tears were weakness, something to be mocked or hidden. But standing in court with my binder of evidence, I realized my tears were not a flaw. They were a signal, a body's way of saying enough is enough. The bigger lesson? Family ties don't erase accountability. Blood doesn't cancel contracts. Being someone's mother doesn't mean forfeiting your rights, your home, or your dignity. 3 takeaways stayed with me. First, documentation matters. Every receipt, every note, every certified letter became my armor. Truth doesn't just live in memory, it lives in paper trails. Second, silence is not peace. For years, I thought keeping quiet would keep Ethan close. Instead, it kept me small. Speaking up didn't drive him away. His own choices did. And third, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the shuffle of papers, the thump of a clerk's stamp, the steady voice of a judge reading a ruling. Quiet victories are still victories. When Ethan mocked my tears, he thought it proved I was powerless. In reality, it proved I was still human, and humans can stand, fight, and enforce what's right. I went into that courtroom afraid I'd lose everything. I walked out knowing I'd already gained something more important, myself. Here's the picture I want you to keep. The house is quiet now. On winter mornings, sunlight filters through the lace curtains in my kitchen, landing on the same table where Ethan and I once signed that lease. I sit there with my coffee, just plain black, no sugar, and the silence feels different than it used to. It's not the silence of loneliness. It's the silence of peace. I glance at the empty chair across from me, and for the first time, it doesn't sting. That chair isn't a reminder of who's missing, it's a reminder of what I gained. The courage to set boundaries. The proof that my tears weren't weakness. The knowledge that justice doesn't just belong to lawyers or people with power, it belongs to anyone willing to stand their ground. I still keep my binder tucked away in the hall closet. Sometimes I think about throwing it out, but then I touch the cover and remember. That folder isn't just paper. It's a story, a record of the day I stopped being silenced in my own home. Outside, life goes on. Kids ride their bikes past the porch, neighbors wave as they carry groceries in from Kroger, buses hiss to a stop on the corner. Louisville keeps moving, and so do I. And though Ethan hasn't spoken to me since that final court date, I don't carry hatred for him. Disappointment, yes. Sadness, sometimes. But I know now that loving someone doesn't mean letting them break you. It means holding them accountable, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Same kitchen. Different me. If this hit home, subscribe and tell me your state in the comments. Your story might be next.